attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, Terp family. Welcome to the first of what we hope will be many webinars in our Terp Family Fundamentals web series. My name is Kate Belquist. I am a program coordinator in the Office of Parent and Family Affairs, and I am joined today by one of our campus partners, Scott Young, who is an associate director in the Department of Resident Life. He's going to be spending time with us this afternoon, walking us through the housing selection process and how to support your Terp. And he is uniquely qualified for this discussion because he is a member of our Terp family and has two daughters who are current students here at the University of Maryland. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand this webinar over to Scott.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be joining you today to talk about Room Selection 2001. One of my colleagues, Tracy Kiris, is joining us as well. And she's going to actually put a poll up to get a better sense of what your students' class standings might be. That might give us a better indication of some of the questions that we're going to be receiving. I'll go through a little presentation, and then we're going to have a short video, and then at that point in time I want to make sure that we open it up for questions, because I know a lot of times we get students and their family members who will have questions about the room selection process, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer any specific questions that you all may have. So with that, it looks like we've got a fair amount of first-year students and then also a fair amount of second-year students as well. So I think I can certainly address some of the questions that may come for certainly first-year students and second-year students as well. So as Kate said, my name is Scott Young. I'm an Associate Director for the Department of Resident Life. I have worked here at the University of Maryland for 26 years. I came here as a graduate student many, many years ago, and I liked it so much I just decided to stay. I met my wife here as a graduate student, and as Kate also mentioned, I am a parent of two current residence hall students who graduated from the residence halls and moved off campus, but I guided them through the room selection process, and hopefully I can answer questions and give you a little bit of information about room selection here at the University of Maryland. I want to go over just a little outline of what we're going to be talking about today. I want to be able to provide you some understanding generally of our campus, our residence halls, and the room selection process. I want to discuss important deadlines and dates and who can participate in room selection 2017. We have about an 8-minute training session that we have on our website for room selection, which I think can be beneficial for folks. And then I'm going to offer a little bit of tips and advice that I give to students and family members when I talk to them about room selection. And then, as I mentioned, we want to certainly answer questions from participants. And then we'll also be able to provide some resources if you have people who have individual cases, because again, there are a lot of situations where it may be so unique that the student would benefit from speaking with someone individually about their particular situation as it relates to living in our residence halls. In terms of our campus, here at the University of Maryland we have about 25,000 undergraduates. In our residence halls we have spaces for 9,455 students. And then we also have two public-private partnership apartments. Those are what you often heard them called PPPs. And those are private developers have been given university land to construct apartments, and it was a way for us to be able to provide on-campus housing for students without actually having to construct residence halls. And so it was kind of a win-win for us at a time period when we were having a difficult time being able to offer housing to people. So in those locations we have 2,913 students. Those two properties are the South Campus Commons and the Courtyards. In terms of our residence halls on campus, we have 37 different residence halls on campus. They're divided among 6 communities. We have about 93% of our freshmen select to live on campus when they first arrive here at the University of Maryland. About 77% apply to return for a second year, and actually that's been a rate that we're very, very proud of because first of all, we don't have any students who are required to live on campus. So in terms of our Big Ten colleagues, the fact that we have 77% apply to return for a second year is probably tops amongst our Big Ten peers who don't require a first and second year. There are some schools now that apply a 2-year living requirement But we don't require anybody to live on campus, and so the fact that we have 77% of our students apply to live on campus for their second year is something that we feel really good about, because I think it's a reflection of our program and what we have to offer our students. We also have about 3 out of 4 juniors select to live in either our PPPs or in other locations besides the residence halls. So I think that that's one of those types of things where, while some juniors and seniors could be exempted to live in our residence halls, about 3 out of 4 juniors select to live in other locations. Again, a good example would be that my 2 daughters, they had spent 2 years living in residence halls. They could have chosen to return to residence halls at that point in time, but I think at that stage they were just looking for a different option, and they moved off campus with some of their friends, and it's been successful for them. And we do have some small number of seniors in our halls. Probably about 250 of our seniors live in the residence halls, so there are some students who will choose to live on campus for all 4 years. In terms of, you'll hear a lot about our different spaces, and many of you may know this if you already have students who are living on campus. Our campus is divided really into 2 sections, North Campus and South Campus. North Campus, about 60% of all of our residence hall spaces are in North Campus, and the 3 communities are the Denton community, which houses Flexus and Virtus programs, along with our Carillon communities. The Ellicott community, which is where our honors college spaces are, Gemstone, Integrated Life Sciences, Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Those are located in the Ellicott community, University Honors. And then the Cambridge community is where our College Park Scholars program are housed. In terms of South Campus, about 40% of our spaces are in South Campus. We have the Leonardtown community, which are about 625 spaces. They're all kitchen-equipped apartments, and they are located directly behind Fraternity Row. We also have the South Hill area, which is a combination of suites and apartments, and 1 traditional hall, which is the only all-women's building we have remaining on our campus, which is Cecil Hall. That's located in South Hill. And then the North Hill building is home to several living learning programs. We have the Language House, we have Civicus program, some of our honors college programs are there, ACES, and DCC. And then also we have, as I mentioned, South Campus Commons, which is one of our public-private partnerships, and that's really located in the kind of adjacent to the South Hill area. In terms of a little bit more specifics about our halls, about 75% of the rooms on our campus are double occupancy rooms. About 13% of them are triple and quads, about 12% are single occupancy. In our public-private partnerships, virtually all of them are single rooms. We have a few doubles over in the courtyards, but the vast majority of our spaces in our PPPs are in single rooms. We offer housing in traditional halls, semi-suites. A semi-suite is essentially 2 rooms, 2 double rooms that between them have a bathroom. So it's a bathroom that's shared by 4 students, and the semi-suites are located at Oakland Hall and also in Prince Frederick Hall. We have suites, as I mentioned, which are very similar to, they have a common living area, and then they have some bedrooms off of those along with a couple bathrooms, and they're usually shared anywhere between 4 and 6 students. And then we also have kitchen-equipped apartments, as I mentioned, and those are located in South Hill and also in the Leonardtown community. Again, same type of thing, except those students have access to fully equipped kitchens, and those students are also exempted from being on the dining plan. So if you have a student who is interested in living on campus but doesn't necessarily want to be locked into having to eat at the dining hall for all their meals, then I think it's a good option for them to explore some of our kitchen-equipped apartments in Leonardtown and South Hill. The also thing is that we have an academic year commitment with our returning student agreement. So for those students who might be considering off-campus housings or even housing in our public-private partnerships, most of those places require what they call an 11.5-month lease. And so those are ones where students would be committed for the summer as well. And so one of the things that we think is important is if you only want a student who's going to be here for the academic year and spend the summers perhaps back at home or in another location, we really think that that's a good option then to continue to explore living on campus, because most of the other locations are going to have longer term lease options. And the majority of our housing options are single gender. When I say single gender, that typically means that we have one wing of a high-rise building might be on the male side and one wing might be a female. But we do offer what we call mixed gender, where those are individual genders by room, but then you would have men and women living on the same side of a floor. And then we have students who have wanted to explore the options of gender-inclusive options, and so those are certainly an option. So if people have somebody of a different gender that they would like to live with, that is an option that those students can choose. Again, those are typically ones that we work with individual students to help them with that type of option. One of the things that we really talk about in terms of one of the important benefits of living in our residence halls are what we call the facts. Because we think that these are important things that students get when they choose to live in a residence hall. And really they're about friendships and connections. We believe that the residence halls are where a lot of students made those first friendships and connections. I have a little event coming on this weekend, and I have people who are coming from all sides of the country, but a lot of these are people I met when I was a freshman when I attended college at Ohio State. And so these are people that I have lifelong friendships with, and I'm sure there's people who are listening to this who probably have other friends that they've met from their experience living in a residence hall. We certainly believe it's also about academic success. That's why our students are here. We found in a study that students who lived on campus graduated at a 22% greater rate than the students who did not live on campus in a 4-year time period. So we really think that the resources available to our students and the supportive atmosphere that they get in a residence hall really contributes to that academic success. Obviously, convenience and cost. We have residence halls that are close by to wherever a student may need to be. So if a student is studying engineering, we have residence halls near the engineering areas. If a student is in business, we have residence halls convenient to those areas. If a student might be doing internships and needs to have access to the metro, well, the Leonardtown apartments are right by the metro station. So we really think that between the convenience and obviously the cost, as I mentioned earlier, that's a really important fact about living on campus. 24/7 support. I know as a parent, that's something that's very important to me, was the fact that when my daughters were living on campus, I wanted to know that if there were problems that they could encounter, that they would have people there who could assist them. Our RA to student ratio is about 1 to 35, which is pretty strong. So in most of our high-rise buildings, we have 1 RA on each side of the floor. We have duty systems that are 3 or 4 layers. We have resident assistants on duty, resident directors, we have community directors, and then we have our director staff who are actually there to support people on call 24/7. We also have residential facilities, which manages the physical aspect of our residence halls, and those are we available through what we call 4WORK. So if a student dials 4WROK here on from a campus line, or 314 WROK, then they know that they can report any kind of housekeeping or maintenance issues 24 hours a day, and then get the appropriate support and response that they need right here on campus. And finally, student development. We don't just have students living in our residence halls. We make purposeful efforts to try to develop the types of things that they're going to need later in life in terms of some of the programs and activities that we do, the fact that they're exposed to a lot of different types of individuals in a very diverse environment. We make conscious efforts to try to have students develop when they get here. I know, again, as myself as a parent, I know the types of things that I learned by living in the residence halls, and I think that I want those same types of things to happen to my children, that I want them to develop and gain skills and insight during their experience here living in our residence halls. A little bit in terms about occupancy and housing demand. All fall admitted freshmen and freshman connection students who request on-campus housing by May 1 are guaranteed housing. Now I know we're talking about the room selection process as it relates to students who are already here, but I think it's important to understand is that we have to guarantee freshmen and freshman connection students who request on-campus housing by May 1. So that's really our largest constituents, are the incoming freshmen and freshman connection students. We're committed to helping students in their first year and certainly in their second year to establish that firm foundation that gets them on the path to graduation. So while we do offer some housing options for juniors and seniors, we've made a commitment that really the first 2 years we think are the most important for students in our residence halls. Not that our juniors and seniors are not important, but we recognize the fact that a lot of those students may, at that point in time, look for other kind of housing options that may give them some privacy and some more independence that they may be seeking. A wide variety of housing options exist for juniors and seniors. Anybody who's driven to campus knows that you can drive down Baltimore Boulevard and you can see all the different housing options that are available. And as I mentioned, we also have our university-owned public-private partnerships, and those are really constructed specifically so we can continue to house students in their 3rd and 4th year. So, okay. Who participates in room selection? So this is one of those things that I think is important to spend some time on. Any current student who lives in the residence halls who meets our eligibility requirements, they complete their returning student agreement by this coming Friday, March 31st by 4 p.m. That's one deadline they absolutely positively need to make. So in terms of students, I was looking at numbers this morning and I think that we are actually ahead. So I think the students are actually listening to us in terms of making sure that they're getting their housing applications in. All they need to do is go into our website, which is www.reslife.umd.edu, and then they can certainly find the tab for room selection, and I'll show you a screenshot of that as we go. Students must be financially, academically, and judicially eligible. So one of the things that you should be aware of is we have to make sure that students have their student accounts in good standing, because that may block them. So I would suggest that if you have access, that you look at your student's account and make sure, and we work with students, and so if there are some issues, it's better for us to kind of work with those students, because we will do our best to work with students to get them to be able to participate in room selection. But again, we have an obligation. The institution wants to make sure that the students are in financially good standing. Obviously, academically, at this stage, that's typically not an issue, but again, a student would have to be academically eligible. And then if the student has had some judicial issues and maybe there's some community service or some other factors that they may have to get done, those are typically the types of things that sometimes will impact the student's eligibility. So if your student is going on the site and is finding that they're being blocked from submitting an agreement, then they should be able to go to our assignments office and get assistance in terms of that. But it's better to do that now prior than after the 31st. So again, that's just one of those types of things that would make sure that they get done this week. In terms of our rising second-year students, that would be anybody who's currently a first-year student, either a student who was here in the fall or a student who came in the spring semester, who wants to return, will be able to participate in room selection. Again, assuming that they're all eligible, our first commitment will be to get those second-year students into our residence halls. After that, then, any student who's currently a sophomore who wants to come back for a junior year, or a junior wanting to come back for a senior year, they may be able to participate if we feel like we have enough space, depending on the number of students who commit to us. And then obviously we have some students who are exempted from the ability to get in. So for instance, students who are in honors college, some student athletes, students who live or Banneker Key scholars. So, and we have a list on our website that talks about the students who are exempted. But again, our first commitment is going to be for rising second year, and then on a space available basis for third or fourth year students who are not in exempted groups. So how do we know who participates then? Well, it's actually kind of a mathematical exercise, to be very honest with you. We know that going into next fall that we're going to have 9,455 beds available in our residence halls. So the first thing that we do is we look at the exempted students who are going to be guaranteed, and as I mentioned, honors college, some living learning programs. We accept students who are coming to the University of Maryland on a study abroad, our RAs and customer service supervisors, Maryland Incentive Award students, some student athletes, and RHA executives. So those students are exempted, which means we know we have to house those students even if they're juniors and seniors. So then we take a look at the projected counts of freshmen and freshman connection students. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky because May 1 is the deadline. So I'm not going to know what those numbers are until after May 1. So to some extent, we work with undergraduate admissions and say, tell us what your freshman class and freshman connection groups are going to look like, and then we take a percentage of that. So for instance, last year is a great example where we were told a certain count, but we know we had 500 more freshmen than was anticipated. So we were fortunate that we kind of were able to get all those folks in by opening, but we have to really work with a projection of the freshmen and freshman connection students who we believe we're going to have after May 1. So at that point in time, then we look at all the second year students who met the March 31 deadline. So depending on what that number is, we just kind of take that 9455 and start subtracting numbers. And then if we still are below 9455, then we would start offering rising third year students the option to live on campus and rising fourth year students. Now I will tell you, last year, for instance, we were able to get all the students who had applied were able to participate in room selection. This year it might be a little bit more of a challenge simply because of the fact that the freshman class size was so large. But again, I would absolutely encourage everybody, if they have any interest whatsoever in living on campus, even if they're not sure, they should still apply. And then we're going to send out a notification email to all residents who apply on April 5th. And that email is going to say one of two things. Either it's going to say, congratulations, you can participate in room selection and here's your priority number, or it's going to say, unfortunately, based upon anticipated vacancies, you're not able to participate in room selection at this time. Now, when we say you can't participate in room selection, that means you can't be pulled in, you can't apply yourself and go to a meeting. Sometimes that's confusing because sometimes students say, well, I'm not really going to room selection, but somebody wants to pull me in. Basically, if you can participate in room selection, that means you can participate. If you can't, that means you can't participate in any facet of room selection. So as I mentioned, completing the returning student agreement by March 31st at 4 o'clock. So this is a screenshot of our web page. And so if you were just to click on the room selection when you go to our website, and that would take you to the next page, which is actually the room selection page, and you'll see there where it says current on-campus residents. And so they would just click on that button and they would log in, and that would take them to the returning student agreement site. So as I mentioned, a couple deadlines. April 5th is when we're going to notify people about their ability. It's going to inform them if they're eligible to participate, and then it's also going to give them their priority number. And we have information on our website about how priority numbers are established, but again, points are calculated on only a few variables. In essence, what it is it looks at the number of semesters you've lived on campus and the number of semesters you've been registered. And there's a few pieces of numbers for transfer students who might bring in credits. And so again, our website shows exactly how that's calculated. But a lot of students will have the exact same number. You have 5,000 freshmen here, and they're all going to basically have the same point calculations. And so then it's randomized within that group. The lower your number is, the better. So for instance, seniors are going to have better numbers than rising sophomores. Now, whether they can use that number is yet to be determined, but the lower your number, the better it is. And as I mentioned, many students have the same numbers, and so you'll find that two roommates might have priority points, 1,000-point difference, simply because of the fact that they each have 8 points. I'm going to spend a couple minutes here then just, we're going to show a video. This is on our website, but it gives you a good introduction into room selection. So I'm going to mute It would appear we're having some technical difficulties with the video, so I think we're just going to ditch that part of this. And that's available on our website. So if you actually click on the room selection site, as I mentioned, www.reslife.umd.edu/room selection, the video is right there on that page and you can watch it. So it probably makes sense for us to finish this part and you can look at the video at your leisure. In terms of some summary items, in terms of the decisions that students need to make, it's really, there's two kind of questions that students need to be able to address. Is do they want to stay in their exact current location? Most of our students don't choose to do that, but if your student has a great room and is very happy in the building that they're going to live in, chances are they're going to be able to, they could do that. So only about 10% of our students last year exercised that option, but it's really easy and it makes the process very simple. They don't even have to participate in room selection. They just have to say, yes, I want to stay in my same room, and in most cases they can do that, and it makes it very easy. About 90% of our students, though, select to move to new rooms, to different buildings, or a different community. So that creates lots of options to consider and allows for group moves. I'll use, again, my daughter as an example. She had a double room in Centerville Hall as a College Park scholar as a freshman, and then she wanted to move with 4 of her great friends into a South Hill suite or an apartment. So that was an option they chose to do, is to look for a new room in a different community. So it adds some complexity. One of the things that we found about our online process was, many years ago we used to do this as a process over in the union where students would come and actually physically select their rooms. When we went to an online process, the students said they still wanted the ability to A, move with their friends, and B, be able to select from a lot of different options. And so they really wanted all the convenience and options that they had available, but they wanted to be able to do it online. So it made it a little bit of a complicated system, but I think that with a little bit of patience, students can certainly get through the process. And then, do I plan on moving with other people? So we have group sizes from 2 to 6 people, and they can also form multiple options. And I'll show you a little bit about what those things look like. So for example, when a student, let's say if a student has submitted their returning student agreement and they got information that said that they could participate in room selection, then the next thing, and they said they wanted to try to move with a group of people. So you'll see that when the student actually goes in, when we start activating the room selection process for students on April 5th, then students are going to be able to choose different multiple options, whether they want to move with a group of 6, a 5, 4, 3, 2, or even if they just want to move by themselves. So in this, they have the ability to then to ask other people if they want to live together. So they would be sending out email notices through this website, and that would give them an option. So in this example, for instance, Thomas Lamp, who was the leader, he asked me if I wanted to be able to be a part of his group. So in order for a group of 3 to be considered, a student ultimately would have to have a group of 3. So they would have to have not only the invitations go out to the students, but they also have the invitations accepted. And they can have the ability to set up a group of 6, a group of 5, a group of 4, and so forth. Now, they can't belong to more than one group of 3. So it's not like they can have, like with your brackets, you can't have 3 different brackets. You can only have one group of 3. But you don't have to necessarily be part of the same group of 3 or same group of 4. I know it gets a little bit confusing, but a student has the ability. The reason we ask them to do this is because sometimes they may have a group of 6 students, but maybe there are not enough spaces for all groups of 6 to want to move. So we think it's prudent for a student then to say, if you couldn't find housing with all 6 people, would it make sense for you to have a group of 5? And then saying if you couldn't get 5, you might choose to live with the group of 4. So that's just one of the things that students need to consider. And then what's actually going to happen is the students then will actually be able to select spaces. So in this particular item, this is a group of 3. What they're only going to be able to see when they go into groups of 3 is they're only going to be able to see spaces that have groups of 3 available to them. So for instance, in this example, these students were looking for a suite in Washington Hall on the 1st floor. And so they see that 1117 has 3 spaces. So A was a single, B is a single, the 2 C's represent a double room, and the 2 D's obviously represent a double room as well. Anything in red would be those rooms that are already occupied. So in this particular case, it shows that there are 3 rooms available for that group of 3. So that's one of the things that students can do. They can select, and they can be as broad or as specific as they want. One of the things that I always recommend, it's better to start out very, very specific and then work your way up. So if I were advising a student, I would say it's better for you to go ahead and say, look at all the spaces, for instance, of 3 that you would accept. In the order that you would accept them. So for instance, a student might say, well, I'd like to find a room that had a single and 1 double, as opposed to perhaps a room that had half of a double and a full double. So they really should take some time and care in terms of specifying the types of rooms that they're looking for. So as I mentioned, keep multiple options available. Because if you only put one option, then there's a possibility that you may not be able to get what you want. For example, you may have a group of 4 that say, we all want to move to Oakland Hall, which is one of our newer buildings built in 2011. Well, that building holds about 700 students, but we'll have about 2,000 students who will preference that building. So clearly not every student who preferences that building will be able to get into Oakland Hall. They also need to make sure that they're communicating clearly with one another if they're parts of multiple members of a group. So we really say that in most of the cases, the students are working together collaboratively, but it's important that they have a good communication among their group. As I mentioned, being very specific to broad by saying, I want this particular apartment in this order, and then maybe if I can't find that, then I'll take any apartment in this particular area, or I'll take anything in this community, for instance. So really kind of working almost in a pyramid fashion where you're starting at the top being very, very specific and then working your way down to more broad options. And also you need to consider what you request. If you don't put enough options in, the system will find an option for you. So any student who goes through the process, let's say they put down 10 options that they want to consider. Well, if none of those 10 options are available, then the system has a default mode that it's going to start looking at the more popular buildings, and it's going to ultimately assign a student. So even if that student's options run out, then the system will find something. And once it does find something, you're going to be bound by the terms and conditions. So it's really important that students put down a lot of different options, and also that if they're not sure and if they realize that maybe I don't want to live on campus, they're going to have to opt out before a couple of deadlines that I'll talk about. In terms of some advice, some housing options are limited and are only available to certain students. So if you don't get options to those buildings, you may need to consider different options. So for instance, Prince Frederick is mostly open to honors students and students who are in particular honors programs. So there are very few spaces available to students who aren't in those programs. So just be aware that some buildings will not have access for students based upon if they're in living learning programs. Think about the room configurations. So we have some 6-person apartments that have 3 doubles, but there are other ones that have 4 singles. So if single rooms are important, students should be looking for the single rooms rather than maybe looking for anything that has 6 spots, because it could be that all of them are double rooms, which means they wouldn't have access to a single. South Hill has suites and apartments, but if students say, I'll take anything in South Hill, and if they're a female student, Cecil is an option. So if they have no interest in going to Cecil, they should probably make sure that they don't put, just generally speaking, South Hill as an option, because they could end up getting assigned to Cecil, which may not necessarily be what they're looking for. And we have apartments both in South Hill and Leonardtown. So if students says, I want an apartment, be aware that they could also get assigned into Leonardtown, because that's also where we have apartments. And finally, when you opt in, you will get assigned, as I mentioned. We have 2 dates, April 7th at 3 p.m. and April 19th at 3. Those are deadlines. So whether you want to come back to your exact same room, you have until April 7th at 3 o'clock to cancel that. Or on April 19th at 3 o'clock, you have the ability to cancel that as well. So even if, again, even if you have no preference, if you do not opt out, you will get an assignment and be bound by the terms and conditions. So I think we have some questions I know that people have been submitting, so I'll try to look at those and answer some of those. One of the questions we have is which residence halls are currently open but will be closing before fall of 2017. At this point in time, we have no buildings that are going to be closing for fall of 17. However, Dorchester Hall, which is located in the North Hill and is the current home of Global Communities, that building will be closing at the end of December 2017. And so that building won't be available for students to choose for the spring semester. So any student who moves into Dorchester Hall, they can still continue to live on campus, but they just need to recognize that they'll have to move mid-year if they choose Dorchester. Another thing about Dorchester, though, is if you have a student who you know might be leaving mid-year, if they choose to move in Dorchester Hall, that's an automatic way that they'd be released from their housing agreement. So if you do have a student who says, I might be studying abroad, or I might choose to maybe move somewhere else, or I only have one semester left, then Dorchester is a really good option to consider because we're going to be closing that building for renovation at the end of December 2017. Okay, a question that says, when you get to that part of the presentation, they want to know about the housing for their choices in South Hill with friends who've been told it's not likely she will have the priority to get in. As I mentioned, because of the fact that the freshman class of fall 2016 was so large, if you're not an exempted junior or senior, then you actually may have a decent chance of getting into a South Hill suite or apartment as a second-year student, simply because of the fact that the second-year students are likely to have the best priority to get into those locations. So I certainly think it's one of those types of things where we will have a lot of second-year students who are living in suites and apartments. So I think that there's absolutely a probability. Again, a lot of that depends on where the numbers are. At least initially right now, it looks like we're seeing a little higher number for students in the returning rate for rising sophomores. And obviously then that means for rising juniors, what are the chances? Again, it's not definitive yet because we have until March 31st, but right now I think with the trend, I think that rising juniors, if they're not in exempted groups, I think it might be a challenge for them potentially to be able to offer the ability to participate in room selection. So one of the things that we've been telling rising juniors probably since last fall, certainly since December, is they really need to keep their housing options open and they need to consider all alternatives. So we will do our best to get as many students as we can get in, but if I was talking to my student at this stage, kind of knowing what I know as a rising junior, I would say they really need to make sure that they're considering other options. If they haven't already done so, certainly they have access to our PPPs if they've already applied. We have open leasing actually now that's going on this week, starting this afternoon, for students to go into the PPPs. So if they've already applied and they've already been given a leasing number, then certainly those are options that might be available to them. But I really think that rising juniors need to explore other options, but they'll get their definitive answer on April 5th. But they should have absolutely have a plan B. There was a question about what distinguishes a suite from a traditional room besides having the common living area. The biggest thing I think is the fact that suites do offer some, they do have a common area, and plus they usually have individual bathrooms, meaning bathrooms within the unit. So it's not like students are going to share a common bathroom like on a traditional hall floor. So for instance, in an individual suite, if it's a 6-person suite, chances are it has 2 bathrooms, 2 single-use bathrooms. So that's a good option for students who maybe don't necessarily want to live on a traditional hall floor. We do have differentiated rates, so certainly we recognize the fact that cost is an issue, and so there are a lot of different housing options depending on those situations, whatever a family might be mindful of in terms of housing cost. Suites are obviously a little less than apartments. They're a little bit more than traditional halls. But again, we also have the rates for each of those rooms on our website in terms of when they go to room selection, so there will be rates associated with that. So when students are looking, they'll actually see how much rooms cost. There's a question about incoming freshmen. Incoming freshmen do not choose their rooms. We do not have freshman self-selection. In terms of the amount of spaces right now, about 50% of our students are in living learning programs coming in as incoming freshmen. And so those students typically get assigned to their living learning program locations. But right now we do not have freshman self-selection. So freshmen get assigned by our assignments office. And in terms of like when we'll notify people, I believe the date I want to say is the 19th of July. And most of our first year students will get their assignments on the 19th. There might be some who don't get them on the 19th if we're waiting for more spaces to open up in some of our more traditional first year locations, but the vast majority of our incoming first year students will get assignments beginning on July 19th. There's a question, do you need to know your roommate at the time or you can use so register for the room? If a student is, most of our returning students probably have somebody that they might want to live with, and so certainly they would be doing that through the group process. But students don't have to, and students can certainly go to room selection and select spaces as an individual. The one thing that students need to be aware though, if a student wants to move into, for instance, a suite or apartment, they're only going to be able to choose spaces where there's one individual vacancy. So for instance, an individual student can't select a space where there's 6 spaces available. So an individual student who might want to move would only have access to spaces where there's 1 vacancy. There's some questions about which buildings are available. On South Hill, there are no specific buildings that a second year student is exempted, meaning all the rooms in South Hill are available, so there is no special living learning locations in South Hill nor in Leonardtown. In North Hill, in terms of spaces that are available, the buildings that would be available are Wicomico, Caroline, Carroll, and obviously Dorchester for this coming year, and Worcester Hall. I think all the other rooms on North Hill would be for students who are in living learning programs. Are freshmen eligible to select specific residence halls? Certainly, we don't necessarily ask students to put in a location when they put in a preference for their spaces, but individual students absolutely can preference a residence hall. Again, if they're in a living learning program, we're going to assign them unless we get some other information, we're going to assign them. So if they're in Scholars, they're going to get assigned to Scholars housing. If they're in Honors College, they'll go with their Honors College locations as with other living learning programs. But in terms of other freshmen assigning, they can preference locations, but we're going to put them where we have spaces available. There was a question about substance-free housing option. We are piloting a substance-free housing option this year in Carroll Hall. And so any student who is interested in participating in that program can obviously select a space in Carroll Hall. We hope to expand that, but because for this year, we just really want to run that. Obviously, students, they can use a program that we have called RoomSync, where we ask questions for students. It's a Facebook application, and that's available for students, and we'll make that available to students prior to room selection. If they're new incoming freshmen, we usually open it up about mid-May for students, and they can find other students who may have also requested that they're interested in the substance-free housing option. But in terms of a formal substance-free housing program for fall of 17, that's going to be housed in Carroll Hall, and then we hope to expand that in the future. There's a question about the May 1st deadline. Presuming that's for freshmen. What happens is May 1, essentially as students are applying for housing, all incoming freshman students are guaranteed on-campus housing. So they don't really get a priority number because we don't use those numbers. They're only for returning residents. So for new students coming in, it's based upon the date we receive their housing agreement. So those students who have applied on January 31st, for instance, would get assigned first other students who maybe wait until May 1. So we really encourage our students to apply for housing as soon as they know that they want to live there if they're new freshmen or freshman connection students. We don't charge a deposit. We don't ask them to have to confirm their enrollment first. So that's certainly, that's not a reason for not to apply because there's no cost associated with that. There's a question about if you have a group and what's the priority number. The priority number is always the lowest in the group, so it doesn't necessarily have to be what we call the group leader. So for instance, if there's a group of 6 people or 5 students, the priority number used will be the lowest within that group of 5 or 6. So, and again, the group leader doesn't matter, so the group leader could just be the person who's maybe the most organized or the person who's kind of the feels like that they communicate most effectively with everybody involved. If they have the highest priority number, doesn't matter. Whoever is part of that group and has the lowest number, that's the number that will be utilized for the purposes of a group move. There's a question about better chance of getting housing in a double on South Campus. Certainly, absolutely, I think that there's chances of getting doubles. It's one of those types of things where it really depends upon how many students are applying for certain whatever types of rooms. So typically South Hill is a popular area, and so one of the things that I would really encourage students is that's why we talk about this notion of having multiple options. And so if South Hill is really, really important to you, then you'd have to make a decision about whether should I try to get with a 6 or do I have a better chance of maybe getting into a 3 or a 2? And students can see that, so there'll actually be counts. So they'll be able to look and say, oh, there's more 6s than there are 5s, or there are more 4s than there are 5s. So a student can look at the vacancies after we do students who are returning to the same room. They can actually look and see the number of spaces that are available. So they can look themselves and say, it seems to be that there's more 4s available for students in suites and apartments than there might be for 3s. So you might be better served by having a group of 4 rather than having a group of 3. There's a question about the if a student chose an option and the system gives them another option, can the student-generated option be changed if a student doesn't want it? Absolutely. Again, they're still going to be bound by the terms and conditions, but we have a process that takes place right after room selection called room exchange. So any rooms that are taken that are not taken during the room selection process then become available to students after the room selection process. So students can certainly take advantage of room exchange. The other thing is we have a summer reassignment process. So we get cancellations over the summer, so we get students who think that they're going to come back to Maryland and decide to cancel their housing options. They might decide that they're going to study abroad, or a whole host of reasons why students may be able to get out of their housing options. And so if we have vacancies in those locations, then students can complete a reassignment request to be considered over the summer. So there's a couple of different options. If a student doesn't like what they get at room selection, that doesn't mean that they have to be there, because there are lots of options for them to change their assignment between the end of April and when they come back at the end of August. There's a question that says if they're looking in a small group and they're looking to move together, does each and every one of the groups submit the entire list of names? No. The only thing that has to be done is that the group leader would essentially send out the invitations and people would then decide what they're going to be in. So no, it's not necessary. The only thing that I would say would be necessary would be if you have a group of 6, but then that 6 is not want to do anything else. And so if you decide you want to create your own group of 4, separate from the group of 6 that you're participating in, then that would be an option for you to be able to create your own group. But no, if you're part of a group and it's the same 4, 5, or 6 people, then no, just the group leader needs to put that information out. Not every student has to do that. There was a question about housing priority. Typically, AP credits are not considered part of that for the purposes of priority. However, there are some students, though, who have taken college credits concurrently when they were in high school, and so those are actually often considered transfer credits. So while AP credits don't put him at the end from priority standpoint, because there are lots of students who bring in a lot of AP credits, but we do have some students who've taken some classes in high school or maybe took some college classes before they arrived here, and if those are credits that they've transferred in as opposed to advanced placement, then yes, those could be factored in. So occasionally we'll have some students who are sophomores because they've transferred in credits, maybe credits they were taking while they were in high school, and that can bump them ahead of everybody else. There's a question about summer classes. We do offer on-campus housing for summer, and that information should be available on our website. But yes, we offer housing. All the housing is typically in Leonardtown for the summer because of the dining facilities not always being open, and so we house students in our Leonardtown apartments for the summer. There's a question about South Hill Apartments, and yes, they do have air conditioning. And so I think the only building on South Hill that doesn't would be Cecil Hall, but all of our suites and apartments have air conditioning. There was a question about how does study abroad in the spring 2018 affect room selection for rising sophomores. The one thing is that if a student is going to be studying abroad in the spring, I'm presuming that if they're a rising sophomore coming in, a student would be released for a study abroad option automatically. So if a student goes on a study abroad and notifies us that they are going on study abroad, then it's important that they just notify us in a timely fashion, usually before December 1st, and then they would be allowed to be released. So that should have no effect on their ability for room selection this year. Now obviously, unless they were an exempted group, it would have an effect because obviously they may not necessarily be guaranteed to come back to campus as a rising junior. But certainly as far as selection for this year, if they're going to be studying abroad and only need housing for one semester, then they would be released. But again, I'd make sure that they know that they have a December 1 deadline to notify us. Okay, I just want to make sure that we review the deadlines. March 31st, this coming Friday at 4 p.m. is the deadline for people to submit their returning student agreement. We are very inflexible for that, so I recognize the fact, and students should be getting an email confirmation. So every year we get students who fill out the agreement and forget to hit submit. So I really would encourage students to make sure that they get this email notification. And if they have any questions or problems, they should get in contact with the assignments office. They can do that through 301-314-2100, or they can email reslife@umd.edu. And again, we're going to be notifying students on April 5th about their ability to participate in room selection. We have staff in our assignments office, and we also have outreach. So if you look on the calendar page of the room selection, we have many options where we're going to have our staff in the dining hall and doing various sessions for students. So if students have individual questions, then they can get those answered by our staff at the dining hall. And there's lots of other activities and events, but the calendar functions gives you all the details about room selection. And certainly you can email our staff, and you can look on our website and you can find my email address as well. It's sdyoung@umd.edu. And I'm happy to certainly answer any questions that parents may have, or if there are individual situations, then I'm happy to address those with the family members.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, Scott. We are going to do our best to follow up with questions individually, but of course, in the meantime, please contact the Department of Resident Life. You can find their email address and contact information online, but it is reslife@umd.edu. And we will be making this webinar available online on the Terp Family website. And so that should include slides, audio, as well as a link to the video that we weren't able to show today. So please check back to our website to download a copy for yourself. All right, I think that's all we have. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and best of luck with your student and room selection.